From 1929 to 1939, the United States sank into the Great Depression, a period of extreme poverty and unemployment for most of the country. Read the passages that discuss a famous photograph titled Migrant Mother, taken during that time, then answer the questions that follow. The following passage is from a book that examines how the photograph Migrant Mother came to be taken and why it was so significant. Snapping an Iconic Photo by Don Nardo. A driving rain was falling on California's Highway 101 that March day in 1936. The driver, 40-year-old professional photographer Dorothea Lange, sat alone in the car. She later recalled what had been on her mind. 65 miles an hour for 7 hours would get me home to my family that night, and my eyes were glued to the wet and gleaming highway that stretched out ahead. Home for Lange was San Francisco in Northern California. She had just finished a month-long picture-taking assignment in the southern part of the state. Working many days with little sleep had made her weary, so she could think of little else but her warm, dry house, her husband, and her young sons, Daniel and John. She had no inkling that in the next hour she would create a famous piece of history. An inner argument. As she drove along the nearly deserted road, Lange suddenly saw something interesting. Later, she described it as a crude sign with pointing arrow which flashed by at the side of the road. In handwritten letters on the sign were the words, "Pea Pickers Camp." She knew full well what those words meant. The U.S. economy was just beginning to recover from the Great Depression, a terrible worldwide economic downturn, but tens of millions of people in the United States were still out of work. Many jobless people moved from place to place seeking temporary work, picking fruit and vegetables, any opportunity to make a few dollars. The camp the sign mentioned, Lange realized, must be where local pea pickers had pitched their tents. Lange passed the sign and had no intention of stopping, but then she was torn by what she later described as an inner argument. Among the questions she asked herself were, "Dorothea, how about that camp back there? What is the situation back there? Are you going back? Nobody could ask this of you now, could they? To turn back certainly is not necessary. Haven't you plenty of negatives already on this subject? Isn't this just one more of the same? Besides, if you take a camera out in this rain, you're just asking for trouble. Now be reasonable, etc., etc., etc." Lange drove on for about 20 miles, 32 kilometers. All the while, she kept making excuses for why she had no good reason to visit the pea pickers camp. Finally, powerful curiosity overcame her excuses. She made a U-turn, drove back, and turned off the highway at the sign. At that point, she said later, "I was following instinct, not reason." As if drawn by a magnet. By the time Lange reached a cluster of small tents and makeshift shelters, the rain had tapered off. Almost immediately, a possible subject for her camera lens caught her eye. A woman and 4 children sat beneath a crude tent with one side open to the elements. They seemed to be doing their best to avoid the soggy, muddy ground. Lange parked her car and moved closer. "I saw and approached the hungry and desperate mother as if drawn by a magnet," she later said, "but I do not remember how I explained my presence or my camera to her, but I do remember she asked me no questions." Lange took 6 photographs. Altogether, the encounter lasted only about 10 minutes, she later estimated. As she worked, she asked the mother how old she was. The woman replied that she was 32. She said that they had been living on frozen vegetables from the surrounding fields and birds that the children killed, Lange later wrote. There she sat in that lean-to tent with her children huddled around her. Having snapped the photos, Lange decided to leave. "I did not approach the tents and shelters of other stranded pea pickers," she remembered. "It was not necessary. I knew I had recorded the essence of my assignment." But although she knew the photos were good, she did not yet know just how good. Lange did not realize that one of the pictures would become iconic, perfectly capturing the spirit of the Great Depression. Photographer Michael Stones later described the timeless photo. The iconic image is a close-up. 2 of the children are behind the mother and back on, leaving little doubt about who is the central figure. She looks away from the camera, her face thoughtful, worried, her body inclined toward the flimsy dwelling, a baby on her lap, her right hand placed prominently against the face, pulling down the corner of a lip, shows a delicacy of manner that contrasts with the dirt under its nails. These 6 heart-rending images concisely and powerfully told a sad tale. They showed the plight of the mother and her children, but they also stood for something bigger. They captured